If anyone had told me a few years ago that I'd be standing in the Swiss Alps contemplating something so reckless, I would have laughed. Olivia Davenport, 67 years old, married to Edward Davenport for more than 4 decades, contemplating a weekend with 3 young men. The very idea would have seemed absurd, except it wasn't a joke. It was reality. Edward had once been everything to me, powerful, commanding, always in control. In our younger years, we were a team. He was the business tycoon, and I was the supportive wife, always by his side at gala events and luxurious vacations. I loved him deeply, but somewhere along the way, our relationship had shifted. Edward, now 78, had grown cold, distant. His health was deteriorating, and with it, the intimacy and connection we once shared. Over the years, I felt myself fading. I'd tried to reignite the spark in our marriage, but every effort was met with indifference. I became invisible, a mere shadow of the vibrant woman I used to be. But then, out of the blue, Edward made an offer that took me completely by surprise. He wanted me to experience something he could no longer give me: desire, passion, youth. He had arranged for me to spend a weekend at a private mountain retreat with 3 young men. I was stunned. "What are you saying?" I asked him, my voice shaky. "You want me to be with them?" Edward had looked at me with calm detachment, as if this were a business deal. "You deserve to feel alive again, Olivia. I can't give you that anymore, but they can." The proposition was outrageous, scandalous. Yet, beneath the shock and disbelief, something stirred inside me, a quiet yearning that had long been buried beneath years of neglect. Could I really go through with it? Spend an entire weekend with 3 young men, Luca, Matteo, and Nico, hand-picked by Edward? I wasn't sure, but as I stood on the balcony of the luxury helicopter, watching the snow-capped peaks of the Alps stretch out before me, I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. I had agreed to this. Now I had to face the reality of it. The helicopter descended onto a private helipad, the blades chopping through the crisp mountain air. The moment I stepped out, I was hit with the breathtaking beauty of the Swiss Alps, the towering peaks, the endless stretch of white snow, the sharp, invigorating chill that made me feel strangely alive. It was all surreal, like something out of a dream. As I walked toward the mansion, a sprawling retreat nestled into the mountainside, I felt a flutter of nerves in my stomach. The building was sleek, modern, and impossibly luxurious, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of the mountains. But it wasn't the grandeur of the place that made my heart race. It was the thought of what awaited me inside. 3 men, hand-picked by my husband. It sounded absurd, even to me, and yet I couldn't deny the pull of curiosity that had brought me here. The front doors swung open as I approached, and there they were, Luca, Matteo, and Nico, each one more striking than the last. They stood at the entrance, waiting for me with easy confidence, as if they'd done this before. Maybe they had. Luca, the eldest at 28, was tall and commanding, his dark hair slicked back, his sharp suit impeccably tailored. There was a quiet authority in the way he carried himself, like a man used to getting what he wanted. His dark eyes met mine, and I felt a jolt of something deep in my core. Beside him was Matteo, 26, who had a more intellectual air about him. His sharp features were softened by the intensity of his gaze, as though he could see through me with just one look. I had a feeling Matteo was the kind of man who thought deeply and spoke carefully, and something about that intrigued me. Then there was Nico, the youngest at 24, with playful, mischievous energy that was impossible to ignore. His smile was easy and infectious, and the way he moved, so fluid and carefree, made me feel younger just being near him. He radiated an irresistible sense of fun and adventure. "Mrs. Davenport, Luca greeted me with a nod, his voice deep and smooth. "Welcome to the retreat." I hesitated, feeling a sudden rush of doubt. What was I doing here? This was madness. I was a married woman in my 60s, and these men, these strangers, were young enough to be my sons. But before I could say anything, Luca stepped forward and took my hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." His touch was warm, firm, and strangely reassuring. "Please," I said, finding my voice, "call me Olivia." Matteo and Nico both smiled, and Matteo gestured toward the entrance. "Shall we go inside? It's much warmer in the lounge." I nodded, allowing myself to be led inside the mansion. As we walked through the grand hall, I couldn't help but notice the way their attention never wavered from me. It was as if I were the only person who mattered in this entire place. It was unsettling, and yet oddly thrilling. We entered the lounge, a cozy room with a roaring fireplace and plush leather chairs. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and the large windows offered a breathtaking view of the snow-covered peaks outside. Luca poured me a glass of wine, and I accepted it gratefully, trying to calm my nerves. "To a weekend of new experiences," Nico said with a grin, raising his glass. I smiled, though my heart was still pounding in my chest. "To new experiences," I echoed, clinking my glass against theirs. As the conversation flowed, I found myself relaxing, caught up in the charm and warmth of the three men. They were attentive, engaging, and utterly captivating. Luca's deep voice held my attention, while Matteo's insightful questions made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. Nico's light-hearted banter made me laugh, something I hadn't done in far too long. But beneath the surface there was a tension that hummed between us, a sense of anticipation that made my skin tingle. I knew why I was here, and so did they. The unspoken question hung in the air. How far would I let this go? As the night deepened, so did the atmosphere. The conversation, which had been light and easy, began to shift, taking on a more intimate tone. I could feel it in the way Luca's hand rested on the back of my chair, the way Matteo's gaze lingered on me just a little too long, and the way Nico's playful smile hinted at something far more dangerous. I was caught between them, and it was intoxicating. Luca leaned in closer, his voice low as he asked about my life, my passions. There was something magnetic about him, something that made it impossible to look away. His dark eyes held mine, and I felt a flutter of excitement that I hadn't felt in years. "You must have lived an extraordinary life," he said, his fingers brushing lightly against mine. "Tell us more." I hesitated, unsure of what to say. My life with Edward had once been exciting, filled with lavish trips, high society events, and glamorous parties. But those days were long behind us. Now I felt like a relic of a forgotten time, a woman who had outlived her usefulness. But Luca's attention made me feel different. He made me feel like the woman I used to be, the woman who had once turned heads, who had once been desired. "I've lived a long life," I said with a smile, trying to deflect the conversation. "But I'm sure your lives are far more interesting." Matteo, who had been watching me intently, leaned forward. "We're more interested in you, Olivia. You've had experiences we can only dream of." His words sent a thrill through me, and I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. It was strange being the center of such attention after so many years of being invisible. I wasn't sure how to handle it. Nico, always the playful one, chimed in with a grin. "You must have some incredible stories. We'd love to hear them." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "I don't know about incredible, but I've certainly seen a lot." The conversation flowed from there, and before I knew it, I was regaling them with tales from my past, stories of wild adventures in Paris, late-night parties in New York, and the glamorous life I had once led. The more I talked, the more alive I felt, as if I were rediscovering a part of myself that had long been buried. Luca listened with rapt attention, his hand resting lightly on my arm as he leaned in closer. Matteo's gaze never left mine, and Nico's laughter filled the room as I recounted my stories with a newfound confidence. But as the night wore on, the air between us thickened with tension. The flirtation that had been subtle at first was now unmistakable. Luca's touch lingered on my skin. Matteo's eyes darkened with desire, and Nico's teasing words took on a more sensual tone. I could feel it happening. They were seducing me, each in their own way, and I was letting them. Luca, with his commanding presence, knew exactly how to make me feel special, like I was the most captivating woman in the world. His hand rested lightly on my thigh now, and I could feel the warmth of his skin through the thin fabric of my dress. It wasn't invasive, but it was deliberate, a subtle reminder of the power he had and the power he could give me. On my other side, Matteo's quiet intensity was impossible to ignore. He hadn't touched me yet, not in the way Luca had, but his dark eyes followed every movement I made. It was as though he was memorizing me, peeling away the layers of my past to see the woman beneath, the woman I had hidden for so long. His questions weren't superficial, they were deep, probing. He asked about my childhood, my passions, my regrets. His attention was relentless, and I could feel myself unraveling under the weight of his gaze. Nico, the youngest of the three, was the most playful, his infectious energy keeping the mood light even as the tension between us thickened. He teased me gently, leaning closer with every joke, his lips brushing against my ear, as he whispered something that made me laugh despite myself. His boyish charm was impossible to resist, and I found myself drawn to him in a way that made me feel youthful and free, like I was 25 again instead of 67. But beneath the laughter, beneath the easy conversation, was a current of desire that was growing stronger with every passing moment. I could feel it building inside me, a quiet storm that threatened to consume everything in its path. And the truth was, I wanted to be consumed. "Olivia," Luca murmured, his voice low and smooth as silk. "You're even more incredible than we imagined." His hand slid higher on my thigh, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. My heart was racing, my pulse quickening with every inch his fingers traveled. I should have stopped him. I should have pulled away. But instead I found myself leaning into his touch, craving more. Matteo shifted in his seat, his eyes locked on mine as he spoke. "We want you to feel seen," he said quietly, his voice full of meaning. "Like the woman you are." His words hit me harder than I expected. Seen. That was what I had been missing for so long, what I had been craving. I had spent years feeling invisible, fading into the background of my own life as Edward's health declined and our marriage withered away. But now, here, in this moment I was seen, these three young men, vibrant, full of life and desire, were looking at me like I was the center of their universe. It was intoxicating. Nico's fingers brushed against the bare skin of my arm, sending a shiver down my spine. "You deserve to feel alive again, Olivia," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "Let us remind you of what that feels like." I swallowed hard, the weight of their words sinking into me. This was the moment. I could walk away now, retreat to the safety of my marriage with Edward, to the life I had always known. Or I could step into the unknown, into the arms of these three men who made me feel something I hadn't felt in years, desired. I glanced around the room, taking in the crackling fire, the soft glow of the lamplight, the way the snow fell softly outside the windows, casting everything in a surreal, dreamlike light. It was perfect, too perfect, and I realized then that I didn't want to walk away. "I want this," I whispered, the words leaving my lips before I could stop them. Luca's grip on my thigh tightened, and his dark eyes gleamed with approval. "Good," he murmured, his voice like a caress, "because we want you." The air in the room shifted after I said those words. It was as though a barrier had been broken, and now there was no turning back. The tension between us, which had been simmering beneath the surface all night, finally ignited, and I could feel the heat of it spreading through me like wildfire. Luca moved first. He stood and extended his hand to me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Come with me," he said softly, his voice a command, not a request. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, but then I took his hand. His fingers closed around mine, strong and steady, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was what I wanted. I had made my choice. Luca led me toward the fireplace, where the light from the flames cast long, flickering shadows across the room. He stopped in front of the fire and turned to face me, his gaze intense. "You're beautiful, Olivia," he said, his voice low. "You deserve to be worshipped." His words sent a shiver through me, and before I could respond, he pulled me close, his hands settling on my waist as he leaned in to kiss me. His lips were warm and firm, his kiss slow and deliberate, as though he wanted to savor every moment. I melted into him, my body responding instinctively to his touch. I hadn't been kissed like this in years, hadn't felt the heat of desire coursing through me like this in so long. As Luca's kiss deepened, I felt another pair of hands on me, Matteo's. He had moved silently behind me, his fingers brushing lightly against my shoulders, then sliding down my arms. His touch was gentle, exploratory, and it sent a jolt of electricity through me. I broke away from Luca's kiss, gasping for breath, as Matteo's hands continued their slow, deliberate exploration of my body. "You deserve this, Olivia," Matteo whispered in my ear, his breath warm against my skin. "You deserve to feel every bit of pleasure we can give you." His words made my heart race, and I felt my knees weaken as his hands moved lower, his fingers skimming the curve of my waist, then my hips. The sensations were overwhelming. Luca's lips on mine, Matteo's hands on my body, and the knowledge that Nico was watching, waiting for his moment. "I want to make you feel alive again," Matteo murmured, his voice full of promise. "Let us." I closed my eyes, letting the sensations wash over me, letting myself get lost in the moment. This was what I had been missing for so long, this feeling of being desired, of being wanted, and it was intoxicating. Suddenly I felt a playful touch on my wrist. Nico had joined us now, his energy as light as ever, but his eyes filled with heat. He took my hand, pulling me toward him with a smile that was both wicked and inviting. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" he teased, his fingers brushing lightly against my arm, sending shivers through me. "Now, let's make it unforgettable." The night unfolded in a blur of passion and sensation. Each of them took their turn, their touches varying from soft to intense, playful to passionate, each one giving me a taste of something I hadn't realized I had been craving for so long. Luca was confident, his touch firm and deliberate, knowing exactly how to guide me. He didn't rush, he was in control, and with him I felt safe, powerful, and desired. His lips traced along my collarbone, his hands expertly exploring every inch of me. Matteo, on the other hand, was softer, more patient. His gaze was filled with emotion, his touch a silent promise of something deeper. He kissed me slowly, his hands cradling my face as though he were worshipping me. It was tender, almost reverent, and it stirred something inside me I hadn't felt in decades. And Nico was electric, his energy infectious. He was playful, teasing, making me laugh even as my heart raced with desire. His lips danced across my skin, leaving trails of heat wherever they touched. He knew exactly how to make me feel young again, and with him I forgot my age, my responsibilities, everything but the moment we were in. By the time the night drew to a close, I was breathless, my body humming with the aftershocks of everything we had shared. I lay between them, my head resting on Luca's chest, while Matteo's fingers traced lazy patterns on my arm, and Nico's hand rested on my waist. I had never felt more alive. The soft light of dawn filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the room. I blinked awake slowly, my body still warm and content from the night before. For a moment, I forgot where I was, the events of the previous night lingering in my mind like a vivid dream. But as I shifted beneath the covers, I felt the weight of someone's arm draped across my waist, and the memories came rushing back. Luca, Matteo, and Nico. I turned my head to see Luca, still sleeping beside me, his chest rising and falling steadily. On my other side, Matteo was already awake, his dark eyes watching me with a softness I hadn't expected. I could hear Nico's quiet breathing from the other side of the room, where he had sprawled out on one of the large leather chairs by the fireplace. For a moment, I lay there, caught between the warmth of Luca's body and the quiet intensity of Matteo's gaze. It felt surreal, like I was still suspended in the dreamlike haze of the night before. The room was silent, except for the soft crackling of the dying embers in the fireplace and the steady breaths of the three men around me. It was peaceful, yet the emotions swirling inside me were anything but calm. How had I come to this point? I had crossed a line, one that, in the light of day, seemed more significant than it had in the throes of passion. My body was still humming from the intimacy we had shared, but now the weight of reality was creeping in. I wasn't the same woman who had arrived at this retreat. Something had changed within me, something I wasn't sure I could ever undo. Matteo shifted beside me, breaking the silence. "Are you all right, Olivia?" he asked softly, his voice gentle as though he sensed the turmoil in my thoughts. I turned to face him fully, searching his eyes for some reassurance. What had last night meant? Was this just an experience for them, part of a lifestyle they led? Or was there something more beneath the surface? I wasn't sure what I was looking for in his gaze, but what I found was a surprising tenderness. "I'm okay," I whispered, though my voice wavered with uncertainty. Matteo's hand brushed a lock of hair away from my face, his fingers lingering on my cheek. "You don't have to be," he said softly. "Last night was a lot to take in." His words hit me harder than I expected. He was right. It was a lot to take in. I had opened myself up to them in ways I hadn't opened up to anyone in years. They had seen me, truly seen me, and that kind of vulnerability was both exhilarating and terrifying. I wasn't sure what to do with the emotions coursing through me. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Matteo's brow furrowed slightly, and his hand moved from my cheek to gently cradle the back of my head, pulling me closer. "You don't need to feel anything you're not ready for," he said, his voice full of quiet understanding. "Last night was about you, Olivia. It was about making you feel alive again, whatever comes next. It's your choice." His words were meant to comfort me, but they also reminded me of the reality waiting outside these walls. What would come next? What did this mean for my life with Edward? Could I return to him after what had happened, or had I already left that part of myself behind? I closed my eyes, resting my head against Matteo's chest, and let his steady heartbeat soothe the chaotic thoughts racing through my mind. For a few minutes, I allowed myself to simply exist in the quiet, sandwiched between these two young men who had given me something I hadn't known I needed, but the peace couldn't last forever. Eventually, I sat up, pulling the blanket around me as I glanced at the clock. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, signaling the start of a new day, a day that would bring with it the consequences of the night before. I needed to collect my thoughts, to figure out what I was going to do next. Nico stirred from his spot by the fireplace, his eyes fluttering open as he stretched lazily in the chair. He caught my gaze and flashed me a playful smile, his usual energy slowly returning. "Morning, beautiful," he said with a grin, his voice still husky with sleep. "You look even better in the daylight." I couldn't help but smile at his easy charm. Nico had a way of making everything feel light, as though last night hadn't been something monumental, but just another chapter in a life full of adventure. His carefree nature was infectious, but it also reminded me of the stark difference between us. I was nearly 70. He was just entering the prime of his life. What had happened between us was fleeting, a moment in time that couldn't last. Still, I appreciated the lightness he brought to the room. I needed it, especially now. "I think I need some fresh air," I said softly, pulling the blanket tighter around me as I stood. Matteo sat up as well, his eyes following my movements with quiet concern. "Do you want us to come with you?" I shook my head gently. "Number, I just need a moment to think." Lucas stirred beside me then, finally waking from his deep sleep. He blinked up at me, his dark eyes still hazy with sleep, but there was an understanding in his gaze that went beyond words. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't need to. He simply nodded, as though he knew I needed space. I slipped out of the room quietly, wrapping the blanket around my shoulders as I stepped out onto the balcony. The cold mountain air hit me instantly, clearing my head in a way that nothing else could. The view was breathtaking, endless snow-capped peaks stretching out in every direction, the bright morning sun glinting off the pristine whiteness. But even the beauty of the Alps couldn't distract me from the thoughts swirling in my mind. What had I done? Standing on the balcony, the chill of the mountain air seeping through the thin blanket, I stared out at the Swiss Alps, their towering peaks seeming so distant, so untouchable, just like the life I had lived before I came to this retreat. What was waiting for me back in that life? Edward. My husband. Edward had orchestrated this whole thing. He had set it in motion. But now, as I stood there, I wasn't sure I could ever face him again. Not after what I had done, what I had allowed to happen. The guilt that had been absent the night before was now creeping in, slow and steady, wrapping around me like the cold air. But at the same time, there was something else. A quiet voice deep inside me that whispered that I didn't have to feel guilty, that I had deserved to feel desired, to feel wanted, that after all the years of loneliness and neglect, I had every right to take back a piece of myself that I had lost. Was that what Edward had intended? Or had this all been part of some twisted plan to control me, even as he gave me the freedom to explore what he could no longer provide? I didn't have the answers. All I had were the conflicting emotions swirling inside me, the guilt, the desire, the uncertainty about what would happen next. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to the way things were. Not after this. The sound of the balcony door opening behind me broke me out of my thoughts. I turned to see Luca stepping out, his dark hair tousled from sleep, his sharp features softened in the morning light. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, staring out at the mountains in silence. After a few moments, he spoke. "You don't regret it, do you?" It wasn't a question meant to accuse or to pry. It was simply an observation, one that carried with it the weight of everything we had shared the night before. I hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know what I feel," I admitted, my voice quiet. I don't regret last night, but I'm not sure how to move forward from it. Luca nodded, his gaze still fixed on the mountains. That's understandable. It's a lot to take in. I glanced at him, studying the calmness in his expression. How could he be so composed? Last night had been life-changing for me, but for him it seemed like just another experience, another chapter in a life full of encounters like this. It made me wonder if this was all routine for him and the others. Was I just another woman passing through their lives, another story to add to their collection? But even as I thought it, I knew that wasn't true. Luca, Matteo, and Nico had been kind, respectful, and attentive. They had given me something I hadn't known I needed, and they had done it with care. But now that the night was over, I was left to face the consequences. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Luca finally turned to face me, his dark eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "That's up to you, Olivia," he said softly. "Whatever you decide, it's your choice. But whatever happens, know that you deserved last night. You deserve to feel alive again." His words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt a lump form in my throat. I wasn't used to being told I deserved anything. For so long, I had been living in the shadow of my marriage, in the shadow of Edward's expectations and the life we had built together. But now, for the first time, I was being told that I had the right to choose my own path, to choose what made me happy. "I don't know if I can go back to the way things were," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I can face Edward after this." Luca's expression softened, and he reached out to gently brush a strand of hair away from my face. "Then don't go back," he said simply. "You have the power to decide what comes next, Olivia. Don't let anyone take that away from you." His words hung in the air between us, and for the first time I felt a sense of clarity. I didn't have to go back. I didn't have to return to a life where I felt invisible, unloved. I could choose something different, something that made me feel alive again. But that decision wasn't easy. "I need to talk to Edward," I said finally, my voice steady. "I need to understand why he did this, why he wanted this for me." Luca nodded, his hand slipping from my face. "Whatever you need, we'll be here." Later that afternoon, after gathering my thoughts and steeling myself for the inevitable confrontation, I found Edward in the study, sitting by the window with a book in his hands. He looked up as I entered, his expression calm and unreadable, as though he had been expecting me. "Olivia," he said softly, setting the book aside, "I trust you enjoyed your time." His words, spoken so casually, sent a wave of anger through me. He spoke as if I had just returned from a day at the spa, as if what had happened between me and those 3 men was nothing more than a trivial indulgence. "I don't understand why you did this, Edward," I said, my voice trembling with frustration. "Why would you want this? Why would you arrange for me to be with them?" Edward's gaze remained steady, his eyes calm as he regarded me. "Because I can't give you what you need anymore," he said simply. "I haven't been able to for years." His admission, though spoken without emotion, cut through me like a knife. It was the truth, one I had known deep down, but hadn't wanted to face. Edward was no longer the man he had once been. Age and illness had taken their toll on him, and with it the intimacy and connection we had once shared. But why this? Why send me into the arms of other men? "You could have talked to me," I said, my voice rising with anger. "We could have found another way, but instead you pushed me into this." Edward didn't flinch. "I did talk to you, Olivia. For years I tried to reach you, to make you understand that things had changed, but you refused to accept it. You kept clinging to the idea that we could go back to the way things were, but we can't." His words stung, but there was truth in them. I had been holding on to the past, refusing to accept the reality of our marriage. But that didn't explain why he had orchestrated this whole weekend. "Why them?" I asked, my voice quieter now, laced with confusion. "Why did you arrange for me to be with those men?" Edward sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly, as if the weight of the conversation was finally getting to him. "Because I wanted you to feel alive again, Olivia. I wanted you to experience something that I can't give you anymore. And yes, maybe part of me wanted to see what would happen, to see if it would help you move on." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. This wasn't just about me, it was about him too. Edward had known that he couldn't fulfill my needs anymore, and this had been his way of giving me permission to seek out what he couldn't provide, but it also felt like a test, a way for him to see if I would truly let go of the life we had shared. I felt tears welling in my eyes, but I blinked them away, unwilling to let him see me cry. "You pushed me into this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "and now I don't know what to do." Edward stood up from his chair, walking over to me slowly. For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or perhaps relief. "Whatever you decide, Olivia, I'll accept it," he said quietly. "But know that I did this because I still love you." His words broke something inside me, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek. I had spent so many years feeling abandoned by Edward, feeling invisible in our marriage, and now here he was, telling me that this whole thing, this elaborate, twisted weekend, had been an act of love. But love shouldn't hurt like this. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I whispered. Edward nodded slowly, his expression resigned. "I understand." The silence that followed Edward's words was suffocating. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, unable to process the complexity of what he had just said. He loved me. This strange, twisted weekend he had orchestrated was supposed to be a gift born of love. I felt anger bubbling up inside me, but it was mixed with something else, an emotion I couldn't fully name. Perhaps it was sadness, or maybe a kind of exhausted acceptance, but I wasn't ready to let him off so easily. "How can you say this was out of love, Edward?" My voice shook as I spoke, my eyes searching his face for some sign of regret. "You pushed me into something I wasn't ready for. You didn't give me a choice. You made that decision for me." Edward didn't flinch. He simply watched me with that same maddening calm he'd had since the beginning. "I didn't force you, Olivia," he said softly. "I gave you the option. You chose to go through with it." His words sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. It was true. I had chosen. But was it really a choice when he had orchestrated everything? Set me up in this retreat, presented me with Luca, Matteo, and Nico as if they were gifts to unwrap? He had made the decision for me the moment he suggested this weekend. "Don't twist this around," I snapped, my voice rising. "You put me in a position where I felt like I had no other option, and now I don't know what to do with any of it. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel." Edward stepped closer, his eyes filled with something close to empathy. "You're supposed to feel alive again, Olivia. That's all I wanted for you. I wanted you to feel wanted, to feel like the woman you are, not the one our marriage has made you become." His words hit me hard, cutting through the layers of confusion and anger to something deeper. He wasn't wrong. I had felt alive again. For the first time in years, I had been seen, desired, touched in a way that had reminded me of who I used to be. But at what cost? Could I go back to the life I had before, to the woman I was with Edward, now that I had tasted something different? "I didn't ask for this," I whispered, my voice breaking. I didn't ask for any of this. Edward's expression softened, and he reached out as if to touch me, but then hesitated, his hand hovering in the air between us. I know you didn't, and I'm sorry, but I didn't know what else to do, Olivia. I couldn't stand to see you so unhappy, and I couldn't give you what you needed anymore. The vulnerability in his voice surprised me, but it wasn't enough to erase the hurt I felt. This wasn't just about intimacy. It was about control. Edward had always been the one in control, always the one making the decisions, even when it came to something as deeply personal as my desires. I don't know how to move forward from this, I said, shaking my head. I don't know if we can go back to the way things were. Edward's face hardened slightly, but there was no anger in his voice when he spoke. Maybe we're not supposed to go back. His words lingered in the air, heavy with implication. The realization struck me like a physical blow. We couldn't go back. We had crossed a line, and the woman I had become over the past few days, the woman I had rediscovered, couldn't be shoved back into the box of what our marriage used to be. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew it would never look the same. Edward stepped back, his shoulders slumping ever so slightly. You have the power to decide what happens next, he said, his voice quieter now. Whatever you choose, I'll support it. I looked at him, this man I had spent over 40 years with, the man who had been the center of my world for so long, and for the first time, I felt a profound distance between us. He wasn't the same man anymore, and I wasn't the same woman. Perhaps we had grown apart long before this weekend, and it had taken this drastic measure to bring it to the surface. I need time to think, I said finally, my voice steadier now. I need space. Edward nodded, his gaze falling to the floor. Take all the time you need. I turned and walked out of the study, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I didn't know where this would lead. I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive Edward, or if our marriage could survive the choices we had made. But what I did know was that I couldn't stay here in this strange, isolated retreat any longer. I needed distance from Edward, from the men, from everything. The next morning, I found myself standing in front of the massive windows of the mansion, staring out at the snow-covered peaks of the Alps. The beauty of the landscape felt at odds with the chaos inside me, but I couldn't deny how much I had come to appreciate this strange, isolated retreat. The mountain air, the pristine snow. It had given me a chance to rediscover myself, to explore parts of me that had long been dormant. But now, it was time to leave. I had made my decision. I couldn't stay here in this bubble any longer. I had to return to reality, to figure out what my life would look like after all of this. As I stood there, lost in thought, I heard footsteps approaching. I turned to see Luca, Matteo, and Nico standing together in the doorway, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. They knew this was the end, at least for now. Leaving so soon? Nico asked with a playful smile, though I could see the sadness behind his eyes. He had been the one to bring lightness to all of this, to make me laugh when I thought I had forgotten how. I nodded, giving him a soft smile. It's time. Luca, always the leader, stepped forward, his eyes filled with understanding. We knew this moment would come, he said, his voice steady. But we hope you'll remember this weekend. Remember that you're more than what your life has told you. I swallowed hard, emotion rising in my throat. I'll never forget it, I said quietly. You've all given me something I didn't know I needed. Matteo, who had been the quietest of the three, but also the most emotionally intense, stepped closer, taking my hand in his. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. You deserve more than what you've had, Olivia. Don't ever settle for less. His words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek. I had come here thinking I would feel nothing but shame, nothing but guilt for what I was doing. But instead I had found something deeper, a sense of liberation, a reminder that I was still a woman with desires, with needs, with the right to choose my own path. Nico, never one to be left out, wrapped an arm around my shoulder, pulling me into a quick, playful hug. "Don't forget about us, okay?" he teased, his grin returning. "If you ever need to escape again, you know where to find us," I laughed softly, even as more tears threatened to spill over. "I won't forget." The three of them stood together, watching as I gathered my things. The goodbye was bittersweet, but I knew it had to happen. This weekend had been a chapter in my life, a chapter that had changed me in ways I was still trying to comprehend. But it wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something new. As the helicopter lifted off from the retreat, the roar of the blades drowning out the world below, I found myself gazing down at the sprawling mansion one last time. It grew smaller and smaller, disappearing into the endless expanse of snow and mountains, until it was nothing more than a memory. The weight of everything that had happened over the past few days sat heavy in my chest. I had come to this retreat feeling like a shadow of myself, a woman who had been forgotten by her own life. But now, as I flew away, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. I wasn't sure what the future held. I wasn't even sure what I would say to Edward when I saw him again. But what I did know was that I had choices now, choices I had been too afraid to make before. I could return to the life I had always known, or I could forge something new, something that made me feel alive again. By the time the helicopter touched down at the private airstrip, I had made my decision. I would take the time I needed to figure out what my life would look like. I wasn't going back to the way things were, and Edward would have to accept that. Our marriage might not survive, but I knew that I would. I had rediscovered a part of myself that I refused to let go of again. As I stepped out of the helicopter, the world felt different, brighter somehow. The wind was sharp against my skin, but it only made me feel more awake, more aware of the possibilities that lay ahead. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. I didn't know where the next chapter of my life would take me, but I was ready to write it. They say that desire is something for the young, that once you reach a certain age, your needs shift, your wants shrink, and the fire that once burned so brightly flickers out into a soft, dim glow. I suppose that's what I believed too for a time. After all, I'm 72, not 22, and desire, real, hungry, reckless desire, was something I hadn't felt in years. At least that's what I thought, until Jacob. It's funny how life works sometimes. One minute you're drifting along, content in your routines, and the next you meet someone who reminds you of everything you thought you'd forgotten. Someone who makes you feel alive in a way you haven't in decades. This isn't a story about love, at least not the kind of love that lasts. It's about something different, something darker, something more complicated. It's about the choices we make, the lines we cross, and the consequences we can't escape. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm not sure I regret it either. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, and I have lived in the same house by the coast for over 30 years. The house is modest, not grand, but it holds all the memories of a life built slowly, quietly. In the mornings, the sea breeze drifts through the open windows, and the light that filters in is soft and calming. I always thought this would be enough, a peaceful, steady existence by the water with Harold, my husband of 52 years. But peace can sometimes feel like a prison. Harold was once full of life. In our early years, he was adventurous, spontaneous, but retirement had changed him. He's 74 now, and he spends his days tinkering with his model trains or reading engineering magazines. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but his world has become small just like mine. Each day we follow the same routine. Breakfast at 8 a.m., a walk along the beach if the weather is good, lunch at noon, a nap in the afternoon, dinner at 6 p.m. After dinner, we sit in silence, watching whatever is on television, speaking in the kind of short exchanges that couples fall into after too many years together. I still play the piano. I was a piano teacher for most of my life, and music was once the greatest joy in my existence. But these days it feels mechanical, like I'm simply going through the motions. The notes come easily, but they don't stir anything inside me the way they used to. Sometimes I sit there staring at the keys, wondering how it all slipped away. It's not that I don't love Harold, I do in my own way, but it's the kind of love that feels more like a habit now, a well-worn, comfortable sweater that you've had for years. It keeps you warm, but it doesn't excite you, and at 72 I had resigned myself to the idea that excitement was a thing of the past. Desire, passion, those were for younger women. At least that's what I thought. The day I met Jacob was just like any other. I had gone into town to pick up some groceries and decided to stop by the small cafe on the corner for a cup of coffee. It was one of those places where the locals gathered, a cozy spot with mismatched chairs and old, worn books lining the shelves. I hadn't noticed him at first. He was sitting in the corner, strumming a guitar softly, his head bent low as he focused on the melody. His fingers moved across the strings with the kind of raw passion that comes from someone still trying to find his way in the world. The music caught my attention. It wasn't polished, nothing like the classical pieces I'd spent my life teaching, but there was something beautiful in its imperfection. It reminded me of myself in a way, of how I used to play before I became too concerned with getting everything right. Without thinking, I approached him. "That's a lovely piece," I said, my voice tentative. He looked up at me, his dark hair falling into his eyes, and smiled. "Thanks. I'm still working on it." There was something about the way he looked at me that made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't the look of a young man sizing up an older woman. It was softer than that, more genuine. He looked at me like I mattered. "I used to teach piano," I offered, not sure why I felt the need to tell him. "I've always had a soft spot for music." He smiled again, and we started to talk. His name was Jacob, and he was 26, though he didn't seem nearly that young. He told me he'd been trying to make it as a musician but was having trouble finding his footing. In the meantime, he worked at the cafe part-time, playing his music whenever he had the chance. There was something familiar about him, something in the way he talked about music, about life. It reminded me of the way I used to feel before everything became so predictable. "You know," I said, surprising even myself, "I could help you with your music if you'd like. I have time." He seemed taken aback at first, but then smiled warmly. "I'd love that," and just like that, something shifted. It was innocent at first, just an older woman offering to mentor a younger musician. But I could feel the flicker of something more beginning to grow inside me. Something dangerous. Jacob came to the house the next week. Harold was at his weekly chess game with his friends, so we had the house to ourselves. I wasn't worried about anything inappropriate happening. After all, I was 72 and Jacob was 26. Whatever was stirring inside me was surely just a product of loneliness, not real desire. But when Jacob sat down at the piano, his fingers grazing the keys lightly as I sat next to him, something inside me woke up. We spent hours going over compositions, discussing the theory behind his music, and I found myself swept up in the passion of it all. Jacob played with a kind of reckless abandon, the kind of abandon I hadn't felt in years. As the days went by, Jacob began coming over more frequently. Each time we spent longer together, playing music, talking about life. He told me about his childhood, his dreams of becoming a famous musician, his fears about never making it. And I told him things I hadn't told anyone in years about how lonely I'd felt, how disconnected I was from Harold, how much I missed feeling like I had a purpose. It wasn't long before the lines between us began to blur. One afternoon, after a particularly intense practice session, we were sitting on the porch, the sun setting over the ocean. Jacob looked at me, really looked at me, and in that moment I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. "I don't know how to explain this," he said softly, "but I feel like I've known you forever," I laughed nervously. "I'm old enough to be your grandmother," he shook his head. "It doesn't matter," and then he kissed me. It was gentle, hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he should, but the moment his lips touched mine, everything inside me came alive. I pulled back, my heart racing, guilt already creeping in. "We can't do this," I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew I didn't mean it. I should have stopped it. I should have walked away after that kiss, told Jacob we couldn't see each other anymore. But I didn't. Something about the way he made me feel alive, wanted, desirable, was too intoxicating to resist. It was like waking up after years of being asleep. So we didn't stop. What started as stolen glances and innocent touches soon escalated into something much more. I found myself waiting for Harold to leave the house, counting the minutes until I could be alone with Jacob. And when we were alone, it was as if the years between us didn't exist. We kept our physical relationship discreet, careful not to let it become too obvious, too overt, but the emotional intensity between us was undeniable. Every touch, every kiss, felt like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of the gray, lifeless existence I'd been living. I hadn't realized just how starved for affection I was until I had Jacob. He was young, vibrant, full of passion and energy, and he gave me something I hadn't even known I needed. I started to feel younger, more alive. I bought new clothes, started wearing makeup again, things I hadn't bothered with in years. Of course, there were moments when the guilt hit me, when I'd lie awake at night next to Harold, wondering what I was doing. But those moments were fleeting, easily drowned out by the thrill of it all. I told myself that I deserved this, that after all the years of giving and sacrificing, I was entitled to a little happiness. The affair with Jacob wasn't without its complications. As we spent more time together, I began to notice the subtle shift in the way people around town looked at us. They saw us together, and while we weren't doing anything obviously inappropriate in public, the whispers started. People began to notice the changes in me, how I dressed differently, how I seemed more animated, more alive. One day, while Harold was out running errands, my daughter Karen came by unexpectedly. She noticed the sheet music spread out on the piano, Jacob's guitar leaning against the wall, and her eyebrows shot up in suspicion. "Mom, what's going on here?" she asked, her tone laced with concern. I tried to laugh it off. "I've been mentoring a young musician, helping him with his compositions." Karen wasn't convinced. She eyed me warily, her gaze searching my face for any sign of deception. "Is that all it is? Mentorship." I felt the blood drain from my face. I wasn't used to lying, especially not to my own daughter, and the guilt was already gnawing at me. I forced a smile and assured her that everything was fine, that I was just helping a young artist find his way. But I could see the doubt in her eyes. She knew me too well. After Karen left, I sat down at the piano and stared at the keys, my hands trembling. For the first time since the affair began, I started to wonder if this was all a mistake. What was I doing? Risking everything for a fleeting moment of passion? I tried to shake off the doubt, but it lingered, hovering over me like a storm cloud. Karen wasn't the only one who noticed the changes in me. Harold, too, began to sense that something was different. He wasn't the most observant man, too preoccupied with his model trains and his routine to notice much, but even he couldn't ignore the shift in my behavior. One evening after dinner, Harold set his fork down and looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in what felt like years. "Eleanor," he began slowly, "is there something you need to tell me?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean you've been different lately, distant? Is something going on?" The words hung in the air between us, heavy with accusation. I could feel the weight of the affair pressing down on me, suffocating me. For a brief moment I considered telling him the truth about Jacob, about how I'd felt invisible for so long, about how I just wanted to feel alive again. But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to hurt him like that. So I lied. "No, Harold," I said quietly. "There's nothing going on." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue. He simply nodded and went back to his dinner, the silence between us thicker than ever. As the affair with Jacob continued, the pressure began to mount. The guilt, the secrecy, the disapproving looks from friends and neighbors, it all started to weigh on me. I could feel myself unraveling, torn between the life I'd built with Harold and the new, exhilarating relationship I had with Jacob. One afternoon, Jacob showed up at the house unannounced. Harold was supposed to be out for the day, but when he came home early and found Jacob there, everything fell apart. "What's he doing here?" Harold demanded, his voice shaking with anger and confusion. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't planned for this. I hadn't thought it would come to this. "Harold, I can explain." "What, Eleanor? What's going on?" The confrontation was inevitable, and in that moment everything came crashing down. I confessed to the affair, the guilt spilling out of me like a dam breaking. Harold's face crumpled with hurt and betrayal, and I could see the pain in his eyes, the pain I had caused. "How could you do this?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything we've been through, I didn't have an answer. All I could do was stand there, watching as the man I'd spent 50 years of my life with fell apart in front of me." After the confrontation with Harold, I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't continue living this double life, couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I was faced with an impossible decision: continue the affair with Jacob, which made me feel alive but was clearly unsustainable, or try to rebuild my life with Harold, the man I'd shared my entire adult life with. I spent days reflecting on my life, my choices, and what I truly wanted. Jacob made me feel young again, made me feel desired, but I knew deep down that it couldn't last. He was too young, too full of potential, and I didn't want to hold him back. He deserved a future that I couldn't give him. In the end, I made the painful decision to end the affair. When I told Jacob, his face crumpled with hurt, but he didn't argue. He knew it too, that what we had was a beautiful, fleeting thing, but it couldn't last. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You've changed my life, and you've changed mine," I replied, my heart aching as I watched him walk away for the last time. After ending the affair, I tried to rebuild my life with Harold. It wasn't easy. The wounds of betrayal ran deep, and there were days when I wondered if we'd ever truly recover. But we were both committed to trying. We started going to counseling, something I never thought we'd do. At first, it was awkward sitting in a room with a stranger, talking about our deepest emotions. But over time, the sessions helped us begin to untangle the web of resentment and distance that had grown between us over the years. We talked about the things we hadn't said to each other in years, about how I'd felt invisible, how Harold had retreated into his own world, how we'd both let our marriage wither without even realizing it. It wasn't a quick fix. There were still days when the weight of the affair hung heavy between us, and I knew it would take time to heal the damage I'd done. But slowly we began to reconnect. It wasn't the passionate love we'd had in our youth, but it was something more mature, more honest. Months later, I find myself reflecting on everything that has happened. Life isn't the same, but it's starting to feel like mine again. Harold and I are still working on our marriage, and while it's not perfect, there's a new understanding between us. We talk more now, really talk, and for the first time in years I feel like we're partners again. As for Jacob, I think about him sometimes, wondering where he is, what he's doing. I'll always be grateful for what we had, for the way he woke me up to parts of myself I thought I'd lost. But I know that ending the affair was the right decision. It was a fantasy, a beautiful but unsustainable dream. In the end, I've learned that while passion and desire are important, they're not everything. There's more to life than chasing fleeting moments of excitement. There's love, companionship, and the quiet beauty of growing old with someone who knows you inside and out. I sit at the piano now, playing a melody that feels both sad and hopeful, reflecting the journey I've been on. The notes flow easily, no longer mechanical, but filled with the wisdom that comes with age, and as I play, I realize that I'm finally at peace with the choices I've made.